Wenzel Brits is one of our partners in the trademark department. He practices in trademark litigation and trademark prosecution, dealing with various aspects of registration, registrability, and also litigation and enforcement. Wenzel has the unique privilege of practicing from our Cape Town office. So we're very happy to have you here in the land of milk and honey in Gauteng, Wenzel. Wenzel will be discussing some intellectual property aspects relevant to the Metaverse, which is certainly something that I had to go and read up on to understand it, and I hope you can all find some value in this presentation. Wenzel.
Thank you, Steph. So for the purpose of this discussion, I need you all to put on your virtual reality headsets and literally transpose yourselves to this virtual environment that they call the Metaverse. So, okay, what is the Metaverse? It is this virtual reality that is being created where people from different countries can sit behind their desktops and interact with each other in this parallel universe. This universe is being modeled to be as close as possible to real-world realities, and that's where the relevance lies. You can wear a t-shirt, you can wear shoes, but those t-shirts and shoes will be branded Nike, Adidas. We can have a Gucci handbag that you can buy for real-world money. Supermarkets you can enter into and buy food, not only virtual food, but potentially order food that is then delivered to your home in real world. That's how the two can interact. On your screen you have an example of what they propose the Metaverse to look like. You can see people interacting, they're dating, they're speaking to one another, and as you can see, it has potential real world implications. The lady with the orange hair, you can see she's got a little logo on her t-shirt. Okay, so who owns or operates the Metaverse? It's important to understand that there isn't a single Metaverse like the internet. It's basically software providers that are creating these multiple universes for consumers to frequent. I prefer Decoraland, for instance. Others prefer Minecraft. So presumably or conceivably, there are many one can try and be part of if you choose to be part of more than one. Some examples of current ones are Decoraland, Minecraft, Sandbox, Axie Infinity, and Facebook's Metaverse. Africa Rare is one that is specifically poised to be created for the African environment. It's not a new phenomenon. It's actually been in existence for many years in the online gaming atmosphere. The difference is that there is a significant push to make this as close as possible to real-world realities, including branding. Okay, so why is there a sudden hype about the Metaverse? It's because potentially there's an endless number of new marketplaces that businesses can exploit or choose to promote their goods and services. Some companies have already started purchasing tracts of land in these universes, such as MTN. Because there's a push to make this alternative reality as close as possible to the real world, there are real world implications. Personal rights are being recognized, such as the right to not to be discriminated against, sexual harassment, and all those rights. So why are trademark rights or intellectual property rights in the broader sense excluded from this? And there's a significant fear of losing out of this potentially new marketing medium. Why is this relevant for IP rights? So just think about it. You've got this new marketplace with the ability to put in shops without expending the money of opening that store and investing in the initial setup cost of that online store. You can promote your goods and services more easily. You don't have manufacturing costs associated with transporting goods from China, for instance, or India or Bangladesh. The goods are essentially only being traded in that online sphere, except if you link it to the retail offering example I gave, where you want to do an online store service example. Copyright, patent rights, design right, and trademark rights are all impacted by this new marketplace. So from a trademark perspective, it's important to understand that what is being sold is not the actual product itself. Yes, in some examples, the actual products do end up at the end consumer, like the shopping mall example I used. But in at least as equals many cases, it will be a virtual item that is being sold. In other words, software that is designed to look like a shoe or a handbag, a piece of art, a motor car, for instance. So that changes the landscape from a trademark perspective, because traditionally you would look at the actual product. Now you're dealing with software. Where do you register it? There's no single trademark register to cover all metaverses. Trademarks are still registered on a country by country basis, and that creates significant difficulty from a trademark perspective, or enforcement perspective. Some metaverses will presumably be limited to specific regions, like Africa, covering Africa, which assists. But the idea traditionally has been to make it open to anyone to attend and to participate in. Some of the classes currently being covered by us to try and anticipate this new movement are classes 9, 35, and 41. Trademark class 9 covers traditionally your computer software, but now we are describing it as computer software featuring a shoe, a handbag, or what the real world object is. Class 35 being an online virtual store selling virtual goods. Class 41 being entertainment services in the nature of downloadable publications, being clothing, footwear, headgear, for instance, or a handbag or motor car. The reason for the slightly specific wording is because the trademark classification system hasn't been updated yet to actually make provision for all of these new technological inventions. Some of the main countries currently being covered would be the USA, European Union, China, United Kingdom, and Australia. China initially refused to accept these type of applications, but they've had a change of heart, and as of February 2022, more than 16,000 applications are being filed. There's a significant rush to cover the main called first world countries, because presumably your consumers will mostly be from those countries at the start. But Africa, or South Africa for that matter, should not be left behind in this new advancement. Some of the companies who applied to register their trademarks in the metaverse include Wendy's, Kia, Johnson & Johnson, Australian Open, Bobbi Brown Cosmetics, Acer, Amazon, Nike, and Adidas. On your screen, you will see an example of what a virtual Wendy's restaurant would look like. You can easily see that can be a McDonald's or a KFC. So what are the potential problems for businesses wanting to register their trademarks in the metaverse? Well, some of the countries that you apply to register your trademark in, you need to prove that you're currently using it before registration is granted. The USA is an example of one such country. How do you prove that you're using it specifically in the US if you're using it in the metaverse? How do you make that geographic link to the US, for instance? Lack of bona fide intention to use if you apply to register your trademarks defensively. In other words, you're not trading in Australia, but now you apply to register your trademark on the Australian register just to try and combat or create a scope for expansion. Non-use, leading to vulnerability, risk, and cancellation. And because you're extending your trademarks to potentially new territories that you haven't traditionally traded into to gain traction for new consumers, there's a risk of competing trademarks already being out there. The world is a very wide place, and just the pure coincidence of the identical similar mark already being out there is quite high. The interim solution for businesses is to review their current protection, to look at covering the main countries that they currently trade in, but to add classes 9 and 41 to their, call it, scope of protection, or their bows in their string. Simply to add the metaverse specific language, being software for use in the environment or featuring the virtual goods. The reason for that will become clearer later on. If the operations in the metaverse will become a reality, then at least cover the main countries that would participate in this venture to start off with, being Australia, the States, the United Kingdom, or the EU. registration aside, from an enforcement perspective, how do you enforce these rights? Because how do you determine where the offending conduct takes place? Where do you institute proceedings? Who's the infringer? How do you obtain their identity? Remember, they are virtual beings, not even having their real names. You can choose whatever name you want. How do you obtain the contact details? What about aiding and abetting liability for the platform providers? They're creating the scope or landscape for infringements to take place and they're doing nothing about it. The lack of actual use is a potential defect in countries which you've registered defensively. And then there's obviously the issue of security for costs if you're litigating in a foreign country and you have no real business interests in those countries. There's some glimmer of hope in that many countries recognize what they call similar goods and services protection. So the argument would be, I've got a registration for the actual real world product, be it clothing or footwear. That should extend my protection to a virtual item, such as a virtual shoe or a virtual piece of clothing. But it remains to be seen whether the courts will actually follow that logic and accept it to as being similar. Software has traditionally not been able to be similar to clothing or any other real world item, like a car, for instance, because the two are completely different. So it is anticipated that similar rules will apply to how we're currently dealing with online infringements on the internet. So in other words, look at the country at which the marketing is directed, where the marketing is attracting customers or consumers from a specific country. People buying the Puma shirts online, can they be backtracked somehow to be from South Africa or Botswana or Kenya for that matter? It is anticipated that some of the enforcement mechanisms that would be put in place by these platform providers would be similar to your traditional forms of enforcement on the social media environment, being takedown notices, a complaint procedure. In other words, mechanisms built into the T's and C's about how you should lodge a complaint for infringement that occur on a specific platform. So the rules will be specific to the specific platform provider and deal with how you're supposed to lodge those disputes. The problem is that they will still require proof of a registration, and obviously owning a Metaverse specific wording certificate or registration certificate will assist in persuading them that your coverage should extend to the Metaverse. Copyright is also another area that is potentially impacted on in this Metaverse, like a piece of art that is exhibited in the Metaverse, or call it logos, like your Nike tick or your Adidas little 3 stripes. So copyright for African businesses, at least, is the easier rights mechanism to utilize because A, it's not a registration basis, so you're not looking on an actual registration procedure, but also because of the Berne Convention, you automatically get protection in the Berne Convention countries, which covers most countries, automatically without a registration. So it basically avoids this territoriality problem that you see from a trademark perspective. But if internal dispute resolution mechanisms are applied by these platform providers, it is anticipated that there might still be some issues for African businesses, at least, trying to enforce their rights, because some of those platform providers operate in countries where they follow a registration system, like the US of A, and they will require some form of proof or registration certificate to substantiate your claim. It is hoped that they will accept statements under oath or penalty of perjury to circumvent that requirement. So because the Metaverse creates this new marketing platform, you can conceivably see that you can put up billboards, you can distribute flyers, there can be a TV that's playing and has an advert on the TV. So your traditional advertising regulations are directly impacted on by this virtual environment. Again, the virtual environment is being linked to be as close as possible to real-world application as possible. So what advertising regulations are applied? Different countries adopt different rules relating to advertising. So it creates a nightmare of potential problems for a business wishing to advertise in the Metaverse. Well, a guiding principle is keep your ads truthful, honest, capable of substantiation, and don't take advantage of the goodwill or advertising revenue of a competitor. The virtual environment is also not spared from the scourge of counterfeit goods. Yes, no real shoes or handbags are being sold, at least in this one example, but the source code can still be copied or reproduced and be sold by infringers. How do you police the act of counterfeit goods in the metaverse? Your traditional enforcement mechanisms, your police, borders, and customs, they are ill-equipped and unlikely to have the appetite to engage in a virtual marketplace, for instance. So it is hoped that the platform providers will play a more significant or important role in combating counterfeit goods being peddled online. In other words, they would provide assistance to obtain the details of the infringer to better able or gear your brand holder to enforce their rights and stop the counterfeiting. Some of the commercial considerations for businesses to just keep in mind when anticipating going into this metaverse is that it's fine to have your goods in one metaverse, meaning to be sold to consumers in one metaverse. But what if that person wants to then take the same shirt and wear it in a different metaverse? There's potentially 20. Do they now have to buy a new shirt again for that metaverse? Is this software compatible to transport between the two metaverses? So you must ensure that there's a portability of goods in the metaverses. Scrutinize your license arrangements or terms and conditions with these platform providers when you list your goods carefully to avoid situations where it impacts or hinders on your own rights to exploit your brand or gives sub-licensing rights to the platform providers. It's anticipated that e-commerce, online commerce, will be replaced with i-commerce in this new marketplace. They call it the Internet 3.0. Whether it will pan out or not, who knows? But at least they're punting it. Brands are holding what they call garden parties in order to create hype about the metaverse and to introduce consumers to the idea of buying a virtual handbag. In these garden parties, they are exchanging tokens for participating. They're giving away tokens for participating in exchange for real-world items. So you can redeem your Gucci handbag at the store after having participated in this online party. What metaverse are you going to trade in? Are you going to look at the regional specific one, or are you going to look at the international one, accepting that there's greater risk when operating on an international platform? What advertising regulations are in place? Do we have protection, at least in classes 9, 41, and 35? Proactively registering your mark in those classes. Because you're entering this new environment, there's a potential for conflicting businesses to object to your rights. You must be prepared to create a new, call it metaverse-specific brand in case of objections. Get your existing copyright protection in place to ensure that copyright artistic works and logos are solid by deed of assignment or some other arrangement, and that you own it and are capable of substantiating it when called upon to do so. Okay, that's it for me. Any questions?
Thanks very much. To such an abstract concept. Questions, yes. I'm just going to bring the mic if you ask a question for the recording.
Hi everyone. I think you are aware of the USA Vikin case. I just want to know your thoughts specifically on infringement based on source confusion and dilution.
So those two concepts will also find application in this I cannot comment on the technicalities of the United States. To put it in the South African context, it will still find applications, source confusion as well as dilution. But South African courts might have a look at it and say, well, how do we know that those consumers are in South Africa? How do we know whether there's any dilutory effect on a brand in South Africa or Botswana for that matter? How do you create that link about confusion, really? In the best cases, they have difficulty finding confusion nowadays. Just imagine them needing to find dilution or needing to prove a link to dilution, for instance. Because there are brands out there that coexist. I believe there's Woolworths in the US already that's been trading many years. So what do you do? It's an interesting question to see how these African courts at least would have a look at it. In the States, presumably because the software companies are in those states and the consumers are from the states, there's a more direct link. But the moment you move away from it, it becomes more tricky to try and substantiate that argument.
Okay. So since we're dealing with NFTs versus real handbags.
Let me just stop you.
Okay.
This is not NFTs.
Yes.
NFTs
no. Yes.
Token backed by blockchain. The two can use an NFT to buy the virtual items. But the virtual item is not an NFT. It's not backed by blockchain. It is simply software that is encoded and stored on a server of a computer game company or Facebook or Twitter, for instance, and then modeled in this real world that you can operate in. They might accept NFTs in that alternative universe, but the two are not necessarily the same thing.
Yes. Okay. Can I continue? Okay. What I'm actually asking is, do you think there is confusion in the fact that we're dealing with the Meta Begin NFTs versus the actual handbags, Begin's handbags? Do you think in that instance there is confusion? Would you say customers are confused as to purchasing an NFT?
If you buy the NFT, okay, the token, presumably you would believe that it's linked to the actual brand and that it's authorized by the brand, especially when you deal with well-known brands, national brands, Gucci, Nike, Adidas, where they've got a massive repute. It becomes more difficult when you're dealing with the corner mom and pop shop, or you're dealing with a brand of lesser renown, notoriety, for instance. Yes, a token isn't a handbag, but the question is, can you exchange that token that looks like a handbag, a picture of it, in exchange for the real handbag?
I think maybe I've got a similar question, if I may, is do you think there's basis to challenge the traditional understanding of counterfeit goods, for example? I mean, you'll in the real world you have a certain quality, or at least so I understand. This handbag is of this quality, that handbag is of a lesser quality, but it carries the Polo label. In the virtual world, would there be a case to make out that it's actually a counterfeit good, or would it simply be a case of trademark infringement? Because you don't have a necessarily a guarantee of quality associated with that virtual item, because the code is the code.
So the question is it more to do with source code theft as opposed to an actual act of counterfeiting? Because unless they try and reproduce it by themselves, the source code, which would be incredibly difficult, I believe. But if they somehow get hold of the source code and then just use the source code or reproduce the source code in some manner, copyright protection could come in place, definitely. It remains to be seen whether it will be traditional counterfeiting. But to create the analogy, it's basically your product, exact same product, featuring product, not being there, including the black brand name. Call it a carbon copy, for lack of a better word.
I think it's certainly something to be given attention to, because it is something that's going to catch on somewhere, and you stand to suffer harm in this environment, and you stand to lose out on a lot of revenue. Any further questions from the floor? Go for it. Not to me, please.
So if you are going to walk into this virtual shop, this game, and go buy your pharmaceuticals or your plasters and then wait for it at home for it to be delivered.
I think there should be an area of study in So, firstly, I don't checks, because that's where I'm from. Secondly, what's the difference then between purchasing something online in a merchant store and if you go online to a website and purchase it? What's the difference between online shopping and purchasing something in a merchant store?
So the talks that I've been listening to, they've pretty much said it's a big traction for this online shopping. It's gained traction with COVID and all those things, but they are anticipating that that's going to disappear completely in the next couple of years, especially in your first world countries. Third world countries and lesser developed countries, a bit longer probably, but first world countries, they anticipate that that's going to completely disappear, because now you've got this added advantage where you can socialize, you can go out for the day to the mall, and you've got that added personal element to it, to the shopping element. And yeah, it remains to be seen whether there's uptake, but that's the exact difference. You've got this personal aspect to it, and other than that, there's nothing different.
And you can browse. You can walk around and see what you don't need and buy that. Sorry, Subaya, go for it.
No, it's still so new, and literally in its infancy stages of development at this level. Like I said, there have been many attempts at it, and there's currently some metaverses, but more for online gaming. This is the next step that Facebook has made massive news about, creating their metaverse, and their metaverse will be the only metaverse. And it really remains to be seen what the uptake is. It could be that all this blows over because, like you point out, access to things like that, high-speed data, uncapped data. You need infrastructure, VR headset, for instance, to do it. It's not as easy as going on your cell phone and browsing. Yes.
Okay, I think that from the metaverse to the final verse, we're done for the day. Thank you very much for your attendance. I hope that you found the talks interesting, and thanks again to our speakers. Those are still here. We really enjoyed listening to you. Thanks, everyone.